Good evening, everyone. I'm Francis Nicholas. This is my introduction for ACTE 699, Inquiry for Teaching and Learning. I currently teach in the Eastern York School District. I'm a high school technology education teacher. I teach primarily wood manufacturing at the first and second level. I teach a course called Push the Limits, which is a very inquiry-based class where I utilize students' previous knowledge to develop new problem-solving abilities. I'm currently a high school building rep because of the fact that I'm very passionate about my profession. I think there's nothing more noble than being a teacher, so I try to represent my colleagues. I'm a former JV baseball coach. The reason that I'm former is because I started taking the ACTE with the STEM endorsement, and when I did that, I wanted to focus on being the best student that I could be. So I have one class after this, and then I'm thinking I might go back to coaching. A little bit about me. I'm a huge Steelers fan. I know Ollie mentioned it, and this isn't for brownie points. I was raised by my older brother to believe nothing but Steelers football, and because I'm such a huge Steelers fan, I do root for other Pittsburgh teams, but it's only because of the Steelers. I love to bowl. I've been bowling in a league with my younger brother for about 22 years. Mostly I enjoy it when I'm winning. I am super competitive. I also enjoy spending time remodeling my house. This summer's project was the kitchen. The left-hand picture is my before I started working, the middle is during, and the end is current. Not quite finished, but we're getting there. About our assignment. Question 1 was about the Mills and Spencer outline or reading the strategies for action research. And the strategies that I feel will be most difficult for me would be phase 1, mostly because I'm not sure what I want to target, how I would target it. I'm very much a quantitative data fan. I like figures, statistics, raw numbers, something tangible. I believe that qualitative data can be incredibly beneficial. I spend a lot of time talking with my students, getting to know my students, figuring out what I can do to help them work through the processes in my room. But I think with qualitative data, you have to have incredible consistency, and I really have a hard time seeing my students as anything more than individuals, which makes it really hard for me to come up with a fair way or a way to keep consistency through finding that research. Question 2 was on the Mills reading. The particular thing that kind of jumped out at me was how Mills made some references as to teachers doing action research on a daily basis. So I thought it was really interesting the way that he talked about developing objectives, which is the focus area, implementing lessons, giving tests. It would be considered data collection. How do we use those tests and what do they mean to us would be the analysis and interpretation. Considering how today's lesson will impact tomorrow. We do that every day. You know, things are very fluid in teaching, and I appreciate that. But with that, I guess when you talk about action planning for me, I think things become very rigorous and they're set in the procedure the way that they're going to be. So I never really thought of it that way, so I thought that was really interesting. However, I think my biggest obstacle is going to be, I teach not all, but most first level classes, and it's really hard to not constantly be changing what I'm doing. My targets from day to day may get pushed back and adjusted. I have to approach my lessons differently because it's impossible to have any consistency in technology education, especially when you're teaching entry-level manufacturing, because the number one focus for me is to maintain a safe environment. I want to teach students certain objectives and lesson goals. However, number one to me is that they're safe, they keep all their fingers, and they can learn proper procedures. So I think that's going to be really hard for me is dialing that in and developing that consistency. As far as the two stories that were shared from the field, they both resonated with me. I have a great appreciation for how teachers have to recognize what they're doing, what works and what doesn't work. And I believe in both cases, teachers kind of recognize that. However, in the first story that was shared, it was very disheartening that rather than having the flexibility and making adjustments, teachers just kept leaving the cohort so that they could, meet their goals as a group. In the Charlotte Merkland School, I thought it was very interesting that they collaborated. Teachers recognized that their approach wasn't working. They made the proper modifications, and the research continued. The reason that this resonates so much with me is on page 9, there was a picture that showed how action research is very cyclical. And that really struck a chord with me because I spent a lot of time talking about the technological design process and preaching to students about how it's an ever continuing cycle that you need to learn from your mistakes and continue to progress. And I really identified with the Merkland school story because of that reason. The concerns that I have for conducting action research in my class, again, creating that target just to get started. Not that I can't make decisions, but it's really hard for me because I'm constantly thinking, what can I do better? Well, what if this happens? And not just letting it happen, but trying to predict and make those assumptions rather than making a target, creating an action to identify that and working through it. I try to think things out ahead of time, and I think that has to do with, again, making sure that my students are safe. Because I'm very quantitatively driven, and because of our research methods that we've taken, we talk a great deal about sample size. Because I teach in a lab setting, I have relatively small classes, again, for my student safety, and because I have an extremely strong department. So it makes it very hard to collect quantitative data because of the fact that we have relatively small classes. I would like to do some qualitative data collection. However, again, the consistency of what do you come up with, what do you look for specifically, I think that'll be really hard for me. And as far as the quantitative data, along with the sample size, what do you measure? We spend most of our classes creating projects and assessing projects and using rubrics. So other than individually, how do you measure that in comparison to a whole? What exactly would I measure? And then, of course, how does this help me grow is something that I would really be hung up with. Thank you. I look forward to hearing all your great ideas and growing through the semester.